All right, so we need to talk about something. Your code sucks, and there's a reason. Everybody's code sucks, but it can suck a lot less. It can suck so much less if you do one simple thing. When someone asks you to make something, let's say, so I do a lot of game development, but this should work for any kind of development. But we're going to use game development as an example because it's just easy to picture. So let's say someone says, "Can you make us the monster thingy?" And you're like, "All right, what do you mean?" And they say, the thing that keeps track of the monsters. And you're like, "Oh, like a monster controller." I'm like, "Yeah." And you're like, "Does it need to like run the monsters, or does it need to like keep track of all the monsters?" And they're like, "Well, I want it like it needs to like tell it when to spawn monsters, like where to spawn monsters, like if it's okay to spawn monsters, if it should spawn more monsters, and just like all this monster stuff." Okay, so what they're really wanting is a monster controller. All right, and you need to first kind of identify what they really want, and that's not how to fix your code, right? Because when you write your code, you're going to start building this monster controller, and you're going to realize that like there's this thing, the game object about bases, and there's a game object about the monsters itself, and there's a game object about like there's the player, and then your controller is just going to be this kind of abstract code that's just trying to keep track of all this stuff, right? So when you build this thing, you're going to start trying to like make it do things and make it spawn some of this and like ask this for information and then ask this for information and then tell this that you can spawn this right here, and it's going to get messy really fast, right? What a lot of people do is they build code and they build this kind of messy garbage and they're like, "All right, I'm done." And part of that, guys, I get it. You're on a timer, and so as soon as it functions, you're like, "I'm done," right? But the reality is you're not done. This is why your code sucks. And this is why it sucks. We all know that this is why it sucks, okay? But the way to make it not suck, right? Build this into your estimates. You need to make a monster controller and a monster controller service. Have you ever used an API? If you haven't and you're a developer, you really should have used an API or even built one yourself. Build one yourself, front and back end. It's a great time, trust me, change your life, okay? So when you make an API or whatever, let's say you ask it for the weather. Like I have an API wrapper for the Unreal Engine. Check it out in the description. But that API wrapper, what it does is it says, "Here's where I am," and then let's use a different symbol. It asks the API, says, "Here's where I am," and then the API goes, "Okay, here's the weather." It's that simple, right? It does something very simple. You ask it a question, you give it a GPS location, and then it gives back the weather. Very simple conversation. Your app, your function, your controller needs to work like that, right? You might think, "Oh yeah, the app needs to work like that." No. Your controller needs to work like that because your service, what you're doing is you're providing a service to the other developers, okay? Because they're going to have questions. They're going to want to know, how many monsters are there? They're going to want to know, like, how can I know if there's about to be a big wave of monsters? Is there a timer? Is there a way to pause the timer? Is there a way to make it go faster? Because they're going to have to work with your system when you're later left it and working on other code, right? So what you need to do is you build a service, right? Build functions. This is what functions are for. You give it an input. You say something like, "How many dead monsters are there?" How many dead monsters? And then you build a function. You figure that out, right? Because maybe there's a kill count. Maybe there's a kill count per player. Maybe they need to know that per player. So maybe if they need to know that, you need to be keeping track in your controller what player's killing which monster ahead of time. This is what you're trying to prevent. Do not make them go back in your code that's already shaky at best and make them mess with it because they're going to break it. Not because they're a bad coder. because you left a mess, and they're going to make it worse if they have to touch it, right? They don't want to touch your code. You don't want them touching your code. The best thing for you, for them, for the project manager is that your code already answers these questions. They ask it how many dead monsters per certain player. It spits back an int. And then you build these services out preemptively based off the game design document or the app design document or whatever design document you're using. Make your service a self-contained container. Heck, put it in its own folder. Own it. Call it like your folder or whatever, just depending on like the rules for your team. But like build a service out of your app. Make the functions name things like how many monsters per player or something like that, right? Something that other developers can remember. Because then they have to ask your thing questions. They don't need to go in there, poke around, try to figure out what variable does what or whatever. They just need to have it all laid out in a service. Even if it's really simple. Like you might already have a variable instantiated that keeps track of this directly, right? But it might not be that simple. It might not be that simple later, right? Your code might change. If you build a function that will always return the correct answer, they won't mess with your code, try to overwrite your variables, try to add new variables, try to track things with bools that do not need to be tracked with bools, they need to be tracked implicitly. They're going to do all sorts of weird stuff, and it's going to break it. And then everyone's going to be like, how come your controller sucks? And you're not going to know because you didn't write half that code, but everyone thinks you did. But if you leave these functions exposed, no one will go in there. Everyone will just go, how do I get that number again? You're like, I already run all this function, this list of functions right here. And they're like, cool. They don't want to mess with it. They ask the function, they get it, they put it in their thing. They ask the function, they get it, and they put it in their thing. And then when it breaks, when there's a bug, and they're like, whose fault is it? Everyone's going to know it's not your fault because they know that when they ask it a question, they get the right answer. Maybe it is your fault, I don't know. But they ask it a question, they get the right answer. And when they do that consistently, because you built a service for the other developers, for the other parts of the app, it's a self-contained thing. It doesn't cause other bugs. You're not going in and messing with their variables to get something for your controller. It stops things like code races because if only one thing is responsible, right? One thing is responsible for something, and everybody has to talk to that one thing to get answers for that one thing. You stop having weird problems like code races or mismatching information. Last thing I'm going to leave you with. I'm surprised this isn't like more prevalent in the developer world like it is in the IT. So like I started in IT and we always talked about single source of truth, right? Because of databases and stuff. And in the developer world, sometimes people forget you're supposed to have a single source of truth. And that is what your service should provide, is a single source of truth. Because if your service answers everybody's questions, and you can even ask for permission to be like, oh, this is handled over here, and I don't really think it should. Or we're writing this down in two different places. I'm going to take those two places and put them in my code. Most of the time people say yes. They want less lines of code in their other systems and things like that. Own it, take it, control it, make sure it does what you want it to do. Make sure that your controller, your monster controller for this example, is the single source of truth for everything monsters. And when that's the case, and everybody can just ask it simple questions from a function, they just call a function, get an answer, everybody can move on. And when they want to add something, maybe they have a question later on like, ooh, wouldn't it be nice to know how many monsters we have paralyzed? And you don't have that question. What's going to happen is they're going to look at the docket and they're going to be like, so and so doesn't have anything to do. Can you go in there and figure out how many monsters are paralyzed, right? Either one, if he does end up doing it and you have it all nice and laid out with your functions labeled right, hopefully he will go in and go, you know what? I'm going to try to do it, keep it nice like he did it, right? That's usually what people try to do. If it's already nice, they try to keep it nice. But what could happen is in that stand-up, you go, hey, wait. I already know how that system works. Instead of making a whole new task about it or whatever, take me about an hour. I can have this thing wrapped up, overestimate your time, Tell them it will take a little bit longer than you think it's going to take, because it probably will, and you won't look bad when it does. It's going to take an hour. Write that function. Get it done in 30 minutes. But actually, like, when you're done, actually be done. Don't lie. Then you're a hero because your stuff's done early. And then you fix that function. This guy doesn't have to go in. He doesn't have to break your code. He doesn't have to spend 3 times as long doing something you already know how to do, because your system's already laid out really nicely. And it's easy for you to remember because you built it out like a service. A service that has inputs and outputs that other people can call without having a mess in your systems. That's why your code sucks. That's a great way to make it suck a little less. My code still sucks a lot of times. I know, because I was the guy that came in and wrote a bunch of, in the Unreal Engine, and we call it spaghetti, but even if it's in C++, whatever it is, it's just, you can really make a mess of things if you're in a hurry and you're not worried about what other people are going to do with your code later. But when you start thinking of your code as a service that you're providing to the other developers, suddenly it gets a lot cleaner, because the way you're thinking about the question and answer system gets a lot more concise. And suddenly the code makes a lot more sense, and people don't have to mess in it so much. I'm Adam with Space Dodo. I do a lot of stuff about game development and the Unreal Engine and other stuff like that. I got a podcast with my friend Caleb. Check it out. See you next time.